It's 1939. London is bracing for war. Above ground, the city hums with anxious energy. Buses rumble through fog. Children clutch gas masks. And soldiers march beneath posters declaring, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." But beneath the city's heart, something secret is being built. Deep under Whitehall, engineers carve a labyrinth of concrete chambers, dimly lit corridors, thick blast doors, and walls reinforced to withstand the bombs that everyone knows are coming. This is no ordinary basement. This is where the fate of Britain will be decided. Churchill's War Rooms. When Winston Churchill first steps inside in May 1940, the smell of damp paint and cigarette smoke fills the air. The walls vibrate faintly from the city's traffic above. He takes a slow look around and mutters to an aide, "This will do." What he sees is not just a bunker, but a fortress of thought, a place where ideas will become weapons. The rooms are cramped, the ceilings low, and the air thick with tension. But it is here that Britain's leaders will hide when the Luftwaffe begins its relentless assault. Ministers, typists, mapmakers, and secretaries will live underground for days, their world reduced to the flicker of lamps and the scratching of pencils on paper. No one outside knows the full extent of what lies below. To the people of London, it's just another government building. But to Churchill, it's the nerve center of survival, a secret citadel of strategy where Britain's darkest hours will be met with unbreakable resolve. As the bombs begin to fall in the summer of 1940, the war rooms come alive. The sound of typewriters echoes like machine guns. Telephones ring endlessly. In the map room, the beating heart of the bunker, colored pins trace the front lines of Europe, the Atlantic convoys, and the desperate struggle for air supremacy. Here, officers track every ship, every squadron, every enemy movement. Their updates are logged by hand, hour by hour, day after day. The walls are covered with massive maps, layered with transparent sheets so changes can be drawn and erased with grease pencils. It's meticulous, exhausting, and vital, because in this confined space, the war is not fought with bullets, but with information. Churchill often strides in at odd hours, cigar in hand, his face shadowed by exhaustion and determination. He asks sharp questions. Where is the convoy? How many losses? And accepts nothing less than precision. His staff knows that when he growls, "Action this day," something will happen before dawn. There's a strange rhythm to life underground. Meals are eaten quickly. Sleep is rare. Air is stale and hot, filtered through humming fans. And yet, amid the chaos, there's a fierce sense of unity. Everyone knows their role could change the outcome of history. Above ground, bombs rain on London. Below, in the flickering light of the war rooms, Britain's defiance takes shape, in pencil marks, radio codes, and the unyielding will of one man determined not to surrender. Churchill's personality fills the bunker as much as the smoke from his cigars. He treats the underground complex like a battlefield command post, part office, part home, part fortress. His bedroom doubles as a study, where he dictates speeches late into the night, pacing in slippers and robe, whiskey in hand, as secretaries type furiously. He loves the drama of it all. The isolation, the secrecy, the sense of command. "We are all worms," he once joked to his staff, "but I do believe that I am a glowworm." And down here, in this dark labyrinth beneath the city, his glow never dims. Visitors remember his energy, how he could rage at defeat one moment and burst into laughter the next. His temper was legendary, but so was his loyalty. He treated his staff as comrades in arms, addressing them by name, sharing jokes amid the tension. To many, working in the war rooms felt like being part of a living organism, a mind and body united by purpose. But the strain was immense. Some officers went weeks without seeing daylight. Aides collapsed from exhaustion. The constant hum of fear, of bombs, of invasion, of failure, pressed against the thick concrete walls. Yet, somehow, morale held, because Churchill made them believe. He made them feel that this cramped, smoky, secret bunker was the center of the world's resistance to tyranny. And in truth, for a time, it was. By September 1940, London is burning. Every night, the sky glows orange as German bombers swarm overhead. The air raid sirens howl and the ground trembles under the impact of explosives. Civilians huddle in underground stations, praying the walls will hold. But deep beneath Whitehall, the lights never go out. Inside Churchill's war rooms, the air is tense but calm, a discipline forged by repetition and fear. Every thud above them sends dust drifting from the ceiling. The staff flinch, but no one leaves their post. The Prime Minister insists that operations continue as if the war above were happening in another world. "Keep working," he says, voice cutting through the tension. "For every second we delay, someone pays the price." The map room glows dimly under shaded bulbs. Aides move like ghosts, updating convoy routes and aircraft positions. Telegraph messages arrive constantly. Losses, victories, coded fragments of chaos. One night, as a bomb strikes nearby, plaster shakes loose from the ceiling. A clerk ducks instinctively, but the officer beside him just mutters, "If that's the one meant for us, we'll never hear it." Above, St. Paul's Cathedral stands miraculously untouched amid the inferno, a symbol of hope. Below, in the war rooms, that same defiance lives in the hearts of exhausted men and women who refuse to yield. London might burn, but its command remains unbroken, and through it all, Churchill remains a presence, not hidden away, but moving between danger and duty. When aides plead with him to sleep underground for safety, he growls, "I must see the damage myself." He emerges at dawn to inspect the ruins, then returns to his subterranean fortress to plan how to strike back. As the Luftwaffe turns its fury from London's docks to the airfields of southern England, the war rooms transform into a nerve center for survival. The air battles raging above the clouds are coordinated below ground, through a web of telephones, reports, and coded transmissions. Every maneuver in the sky is tracked here, plotted by hand in real time. Churchill spends hours in the map room, cigar burning down as his eyes trace the enemy's movements. He knows Britain's fate rests on a few hundred young pilots. The few, as he will later call them. Every day brings terrible numbers, squadrons depleted, pilots lost, fuel reserves running low. Yet the reports also bring signs of resilience, German losses mounting, morale holding. He senses the shift before anyone else. Britain is not beaten. The RAF is bloodied, but not broken. Never in the field of human conflict, he will declare soon, was so much owed by so many to so few. That speech, born in the claustrophobic tension of these very rooms, becomes a lifeline, a rallying cry that turns fear into faith. At night, while bombs fall, Churchill often sits alone at the long cabinet table, head bowed, listening to the faint rumble above. Around him are the instruments of command, maps, dispatches, and the ever-present telephone that links him to his generals and the king. He rarely speaks in those moments. He just thinks, his mind moving faster than the war itself. The war rooms no longer feel like a refuge. They are a crucible, the pressure chamber of empire. Every breath, every decision, every silence echoes with the weight of survival. Not everyone who worked in Churchill's bunker carried a weapon, but each carried a secret. Among the clerks and typists were members of MI5, intelligence officers, and code specialists who fed the Prime Minister fragments of hidden truths, intercepted German messages, decoded Enigma signals, and whispered reports from occupied Europe. Information flowed through the bunker like a bloodstream. The map room connected with Bletchley Park, the Navy's headquarters, and the Air Ministry. Every update was relayed through a chain of trust so tight that a single error could cost lives. The people who maintained it rarely saw daylight. They worked 12-hour shifts, eating sandwiches beside humming telephones, speaking in clipped tones and half-sentences. One young typist, Elizabeth Layton, would later recall Churchill dictating strategy at a furious pace, his words tumbling out faster than she could type. When she stumbled, he would growl in frustration, then, catching himself, smile wearily and say, "Courage, my dear. Courage is the key to everything." The bunker itself became a maze of whispers. Each corridor led to another world. The cabinet room, the cipher office, the telephone exchange, and Churchill's private quarters where he sometimes napped in full uniform. There was no sense of time, only the rhythm of war, reports, orders, silence, explosions, and then more reports. Every message that passed through those walls was a piece of history in motion. And yet, outside those walls, no one knew this secret world even existed. To protect it, its very existence was erased from public knowledge. Londoners would pass the building above every day, never realizing that beneath their feet, the fate of the free world was being decided. By 1942, the war had spread across oceans. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic like wolves, strangling Britain's lifeline. Merchant ships carrying food, fuel, and ammunition were vanishing beneath the waves, and Churchill knew that without these convoys, the island would starve. Inside the war rooms, the focus shifted. Maps of Europe gave way to charts of the Atlantic, covered with colored pins marking convoys, submarine sightings, and lost vessels. Every dot represented hundreds of men fighting against the cold, the sea, and an unseen enemy. Churchill called it the only thing that really frightened me during the war. His fear wasn't for himself, but for the island he loved, a nation utterly dependent on the sea. In these rooms, he spent long nights bent over naval reports, his voice rough with fatigue as he barked orders, reroute convoys, deploy more escort ships, increase air patrols. The war rooms became a lifeline between the Admiralty and the front lines. Intelligence from cracked Enigma codes began flowing in, intercepted signals revealing U-boat positions. Slowly, painfully, Britain started to hit back. New radar systems, improved depth charges, and the bravery of escort sailors began to turn the tide. One night, as news came that a major convoy had made it safely through, the usually grim war rooms erupted in quiet cheers. Churchill smiled faintly, took a puff from his cigar, and said, "Gentlemen, we have snatched the lion's tail from the sea." For a brief moment, the bunker, that world of shadows, felt the warmth of victory. By 1943, Churchill's bunker was no longer the command post of an isolated nation. It had become the nerve center of an alliance: Britain, America, and the Soviet Union. Three powers bound together by necessity and distrust in equal measure. From the war rooms, Churchill spoke to Roosevelt and Stalin through the crackle of transatlantic cables. The conversations were formal, coded, and often tense. Roosevelt was optimistic and diplomatic. Stalin was cold and calculating. Churchill balanced between them, part warrior, part statesman, part juggler trying to keep the alliance from fracturing. Maps now showed not just Europe but the entire world, from North Africa to the Pacific. Colored pins tracked not only battles but logistics, fuel reserves, food shipments, aircraft deliveries. Every decision, every movement was coordinated through this maze of underground offices. Behind Churchill stood a small army of women, typists, stenographers, analysts, whose hands translated chaos into clarity. They knew their prime minister's moods better than anyone. When he was pacing and smoking furiously, bad news had arrived. When he hummed softly, it meant progress. They worked in silence, aware that history passed through their fingers every hour. And as the plans for a massive Allied invasion of Europe began to form, the war rooms buzzed with a new energy. Cautious hope. The tide of war was shifting. The hunters had become the hunted. Yet, even in triumph, Churchill reminded his staff, "This is not the beginning of the end, but perhaps the end of the beginning." By early 1944, the war rooms had become a fortress of secrets. Behind locked doors, under armed guard, the most daring military operation in history was taking shape. Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Every corridor hummed with restrained urgency. Engineers, intelligence officers, and strategists came and went at all hours. Giant maps of Normandy were pinned on the walls. Lines of red and blue marked landing zones, naval routes, and German defenses. The air smelled of tobacco, paper, and fear. Churchill, though now weary from years of war, was more determined than ever. He demanded updates on every detail: tides, weather forecasts, supply lines. He argued with generals, challenged assumptions, and rewrote briefings in his own hand. "We cannot afford a single mistake," he told his staff. "If this fails, we may not get another chance." At night, after hours of discussion, he would walk alone through the silent bunker, his footsteps echoing down the narrow halls. Sometimes he paused by the map room, studying the sea of pins glowing under dim lights. The invasion would be the culmination of everything they had fought for, and the price of failure would be unthinkable. On June 6, 1944, as reports of the Normandy landings began to reach London, the war rooms held their breath. Telegrams poured in: troops ashore, casualties heavy, resistance fierce. When confirmation came that the beachheads had been secured, Churchill leaned back, exhausted. "We are once again masters of our fate," he murmured. The war rooms, that secret citadel of endurance, had just witnessed the turning of history's tide. By late 1944, victory was within sight, but Churchill no longer felt triumphant. The war rooms had become both his command post and his prison. He slept little, ate less, and smoked endlessly. His once booming voice was hoarse from endless briefings, and his face, once full of defiance, had aged a decade in months. Every morning, he descended into the bunker like a miner going underground. He'd pass clerks bent over typewriters, aides clutching folders, and guards standing rigid in the narrow halls. Yet, for all its energy, the place was heavy with fatigue. The staff had worked through thousands of air raids, meals missed, and letters unread. Inside the cabinet room, Churchill presided over war councils that could last for hours. The air grew thick with smoke and tension as generals debated the next move: across France, into the Low Countries, and toward Germany's heartland. He listened intently, interrupting with sharp questions or bursts of frustration. "I do not want excuses," he once snapped. "I want results." But at night, when the lights dimmed and the war rooms grew quiet, the weight of those results pressed down. Every red mark on a map meant lives lost. Sailors drowned in the Atlantic, soldiers fallen in Normandy, civilians bombed in their homes. Churchill bore it all in silence, and yet he would still end each long day the same way, with a glass of whiskey, a fresh cigar, and a whispered toast to Britain's survival. "Never, never give in," he muttered once, staring into the dim light of the map room. It was not a speech for the House of Commons this time, but a promise to himself. By early 1945, the sound of war was shifting. No longer was it the thunder of bombs over London. It was the distant roar of Allied guns pushing deep into Germany. The maps in the war rooms told the story better than any words. Red pins, Allied positions, had crept eastward, crossing the Rhine and moving toward Berlin. Churchill's war cabinet now faced questions that were no longer about how to survive, but what victory would cost. Cities across Europe lay in ruins, millions were dead, and Britain itself was bankrupt. The Prime Minister knew that while the armies were advancing, the country he had sworn to protect was bleeding. He spent long hours in the map room, studying every report from Eisenhower's headquarters. "We are witnessing the death of tyranny," he said once, though his tone was not triumphant. It was weary, almost mournful. He had always understood that even victory could be tragic. Then came April 30th, 1945. The news that Adolf Hitler was dead. The message reached the war rooms quietly, through a coded transmission from Allied command. A stunned silence fell across the bunker. Some wept, others just stared at the floor. Churchill stood still for a long time, then simply said, "The monster is gone." Outside, Londoners began to fill the streets, but down below, in the war rooms, the Prime Minister remained at his desk, lost in thought. He knew this was not the end. Japan still fought on, and the future of Europe hung in fragile balance. Yet, for the first time in nearly 6 years, Churchill allowed himself to breathe. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Crowds filled Trafalgar Square, singing, crying, and waving flags. The sound of celebration rolled through the city like thunder. But deep beneath Whitehall, the war rooms were strangely quiet. The staff who had spent years underground now stood together for the last time. Many wept openly as they packed away files, folded maps, and shut down telephones that had never stopped ringing. The walls, once alive with urgency and fear, seemed suddenly lifeless, an echo of the struggle that had defined them. Churchill entered the map room one final time. The Great Wall map of Europe still showed the red pins of Allied armies. He stood in silence, tracing with his finger the route from the Normandy beaches to Berlin. So much, for so few, he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. Later that day, he addressed the nation from above ground, his voice broadcast across Britain. "This is your victory," he told the people. "Not mine." But those who had worked beside him knew the truth. Without his stubborn will, there might have been no victory at all. When the lights were finally switched off, the war rooms were sealed exactly as they had been. Pens on desks, maps on walls, chairs left askew, a frozen moment in time. For decades, they remained untouched, buried in silence beneath the modern city. Today, when visitors walk through those dim corridors, they can still feel the weight of history, the tension, the courage, and the unyielding determination of the man who once commanded a war from the shadows. When the war ended, the war rooms were abandoned almost overnight. The staff left quietly, and the heavy steel doors were locked. Files, pencils, typewriters, all of it stayed as it was on the day of victory. For Churchill, leaving the bunker was like stepping out of a dream that had turned into a nightmare. Above ground, the streets of London were full of life again. The smell of fresh bread, the chatter of children, the first light that wasn't dimmed by blackout curtains. Britain was breathing again. But Churchill himself was restless. The man who had spent years commanding from the underground now found himself without a war to fight. He often said he felt like a lion that had lost its roar. The war had given him purpose, focus, and power. Peace, in contrast, was dull and political. When the general election came in July 1945, the people he had led to victory voted him out of office. He accepted it with grace. "That's democracy," he said. But privately, he was wounded. For all his brilliance and courage, Churchill's greatest years were forged in the crucible of crisis. Without the war rooms, without the tension and the maps and the midnight phone calls, a silence fell over his life that no speech could fill. Sometimes, late at night, he would tell his wife Clementine that he still heard the hum of the generators, the clatter of typewriters, the distant echo of marching boots. The war was over. But it never truly left him. For nearly 2 decades, the war rooms remained sealed beneath the streets of London. Dust gathered on the maps, papers yellowed, and the air grew stale. Only a handful of government officials even remembered they existed. Then, in the early 1960s, a team of historians stumbled upon the forgotten bunker. What they found stunned them. The entire complex was perfectly preserved, as though Churchill might walk in at any moment. Half-smoked cigars, a coffee cup left half full, a calendar still showing the final days of war. When the rooms were finally opened to the public years later, people walked through in silence. They could almost hear the voices again, Churchill's rumbling tone, the chatter of clerks, the ticking of the wall clocks. Visitors described the place as sacred, not because of religion, but because it felt like stepping back into the heartbeat of Britain's survival. Every inch of the bunker told a story. The cramped sleeping quarters reminded visitors of the fear that gripped London. The map room walls, still pierced with thousands of tiny pinholes, spoke of 6 years of relentless struggle. And in the corner, a red telephone, the hotline to Washington, stood as a relic of an alliance that changed the world. The war rooms were no longer a secret nerve center of empire. They had become something greater, a monument to endurance, to leadership, and to the will of a people who refused to surrender. Today, the Churchill War Rooms are more than a museum. They are a silent testimony to courage under fire, a reminder of how history was guided not from a grand palace, but from a dimly lit basement beneath the chaos of war. Every visitor who walks through those narrow corridors can feel it, the claustrophobia, the urgency, the human spirit that refused to break. In that darkness, Britain's fate was written not with ease, but with sweat, fear, and sheer determination. Churchill himself never forgot the men and women who worked beside him there. "We shape our buildings," he once said, and afterward, "Our buildings shape us." The war rooms shaped him, and through him, they shaped the world. When he died in 1965, the nation mourned as one. His coffin passed through London's streets and thousands lined the roads in silence. As it did, many remembered the man beneath the city, the one who had led through the darkest nights, who had faced annihilation with a cigar in one hand and destiny in the other. The war rooms remain frozen in time, their walls still whispering his voice. They remind us that leadership is not about comfort or glory, but conviction, the ability to stand firm when the world trembles. And as the lights flicker over the maps and the echo of his speeches lingers in the air, one truth endures. Winston Churchill did not merely lead Britain through war, he taught humanity how to fight from the shadows and emerge into the light.